Hey everyone, and welcome back to What's the Plan, the podcast where we dive into the matters of our careers in the architecture and urban planning field. I'm Hayley.
And I'm Andrea. So Hayley, what's the plan this week?
This week's plan is all about elevation documentary, how drones will change cities.
Yes, so this is another rookie review episode, and this series is about us reviewing different films or documentaries about architecture and urban planning. And the reason why we came upon this is since the birth of moving pictures, film and architecture have been intertwined. And this intersection exists because both film and architecture are an art form of cultural representation or expression that addresses the human experience through space. And as a result, filmmaking cannot exist without architecture and vice versa. As a result, we thought, why not we dive into that?
Mm-hmm. And with that being said, as two cinephiles, we thought it would be fun to start a series of film reviews and analyses. This is a series where we will separately indulge in the media of choice and come up with our own analysis and questions about the media. We will then come together and share our own opinions and ask each other questions we have about what we reviewed.
This time around, instead of doing a film, we'll be talking about the documentary, Elevation.
So this was produced by architectural magazine Design in 2018. Elevation is a short documentary that talks about how drones will change our cities. From the way we build our cities, the way people travel, the way goods are delivered, to even how buildings look and are constructed.
So, upon watching this, what were your initial thoughts?
So, I am going to be honest. I think before watching this, I really didn't know what drones were. I know.
Oh, really?
I'm a little ashamed to say,
okay.
I knew they were, things that fly around in the air, but I didn't know to what scale drones existed. And so while I was watching this, I also did a little bit of research on what drones are. And with that, I actually learned more about drones, and I think before doing that, what I imagined drones to be were honestly just the small flying
toy?
Yes, I've only imagined toy scale drones, and I didn't realize how massive drones could get. So when you first suggested that we watch this documentary, I was very excited to learn how those little toys could change cities. But now that I know, drones can be very big in scale and can actually achieve a lot. I guess that was my initial thought, is that drones are pretty cool things. What about you?
So most of my initial background and history with drones is actually learning it through watching YouTube. So drones has become because of their scale and their size and their price point, they've become very attainable for YouTubers to include that into their cinematography.
Yes.
So I watch a lot of YouTubers that are really into camera gear and all that kind of stuff. So they always talk about the latest drone, especially from the certain brand called DJI, and so most of what my experience with it was through camera, cinematography, all that kind of stuff. And then actually in my final year of undergrad, I took a course called Digital Tools.
Okay.
And then there briefly I learned that there are a lot of things that drones can actually provide for architecture. And some of these things were actually talked about in the documentary. So the first one being digital fabrication. So the use of drones to construct buildings, and especially when you want such a precise repetitive movement or a design that's really hard to for humans to pinpoint. So it's when you're modeling something and you want a particular curve, it's really easy to say oh, I want it on X number whatever, Y number whatever. But when a human goes to construct it, a person cannot figure that out where that is in space. But the thing is, drones can do it. So I was aware that drones could do that. And another thing is that I was aware that drones could sort of similar to how people use it as a camera to take videos. You can use it to 3D scan landscapes and then create digital models. So it's I was aware that drones could do those two things, and which I think are wonderful. But also at the same time, there were a lot of other reasons why or a lot of things that this watching this documentary kind of brought up to me that makes me kind of uneasy about the idea of being like drones having a really massive impact on our community.
Okay, let's hear it.
So I guess like prior to watching, you probably had no like previous like opinions specifically or anything that could have changed your input on them?
So I guess like within the past few years, in recent years, the talk about drones becoming like vehicles for delivery has become a really hot topic.
Yeah.
And so that has like given me a little bit of an idea of how drones can help elevate everyday things.
Or like the way we live, I guess.
The way we live. But other than that, like, I never really thought much about how else drones can help. But with that comment in mind, how, like, drones could be used to make deliveries and such, it has given me the mindset that, like, if we are able to get drones to do very repetitive human actions, I think in those ways, drones would be really helpful. But I do know that in the documentary we watched, they did talk about other ways that drones will become more integrated into our lives in the future. And I think, I mean, some of those things I think would be really cool, but some of those things I just think are not feasible. Yeah.
So yeah, so like you said, like the one of the cool things I think they mentioned was like from a design implication, how like a lot of times architects do not think about the roof. They don't really do much to the roof. They leave a lot of like mechanical stuff. It's just like your roof is just empty and no one really goes up there. But I think like one thing that drones do bring into the discussion is that because you're able to see the top of a building now, the roof has become sort of like a facade or like an elevation that's important to include into your design. So I think that's something that's really cool.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you had any like ideas of that or thoughts about the roof being part of an important part of a building.
I think it's nice that now every part of a building would have to be designed with the intention of being viewed by the public. But with that being said, like I kind of equate that to every house or every household having like a mystery closet that is used to like hide all of their messy things. And I think it's always nice to have everything in your life perfectly clean, very meticulous, but how feasible is that? Like how can we have roofs that are currently, like you said, very mechanical, very architects don't really take the design of the roofs into consideration as much as the side facades of the building. But if now architects do have to take the design of roofs into consideration, how will they mask the mess that is currently rooftops? Like, is that feasible?
Yeah, it's completely feasible. So it's like, I was actually surprised to learn that like a lot of architects don't really care about the roof.
Oh,
because I feel like being based in Toronto, especially like if all your work consists in the downtown core, you're building like tall skyscrapers, you're building multi-story buildings where the roof is actually pretty important. And like, I don't know if you know, but like there's a bylaw where if you have a multi-story building with a certain amount of capacity, you have to have a certain percentage of your roof as a green roof.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So because of that, I always thought like, oh, we always have to do something with the roof. And like a lot of times also like roof becomes an amenity and they provide a lot of like extra like space for people, and I think that's also a very enjoyable thing. So like in my opinion, I always thought the roof was kind of a nice thing to have.
Okay.
And to develop, and like when you do that, a lot of times it's not your entire roof floor plan that is like dedicated to either like a green roof or for an amenity space. There's always like a small percentage left over to hide your mechanical equipment, and usually they would just have like something they would call a mechanical penthouse. So it's sort of like a partial floor. So it's like you still technically have a roof plan,
right?
But the thing is, there's also a room or a little box on the side that like hides all your like HVAC stuff and stuff like that. So it's like it's really doable. It's just a matter of like whether or not people put in the effort and care. And
yeah, that's true. So I have heard of the term mechanical penthouses, and a lot of the work that I've encountered with development with mechanical penthouses is that because as of now it's still kind of unclear, it's like the definition is very blurred. Developers are able to get away with not counting the mechanical penthouse as part of their stories.
Yes.
And so because of that, they can get a higher height in their building. But if we as an industry are going to have mechanical penthouses and a usable rooftop as more integrated into our designs, does this mean that the way that we currently work with pushing the boundaries of height density will need to figure out a new way to go about that?
I don't think so, because I think a lot of the pushing when it comes to like trying to get an extra floor in is not necessarily for design purposes, but more so money purposes, because when you have an extra floor, you have more units and more rentable space or like sellable space. So from that standpoint, I don't really think so. It's more so like you don't always need to, I guess, changing the mindset of the client, where like you don't need to maximize profit in every situation. It's like you're already earning a good amount of profit, so it's like whether or not you do have or you're able to include a mechanical penthouse or not, it shouldn't really affect your overall, I guess, design of your building. So it's like whether or not you have that extra floor or not, it's like I don't think it should be a major impact.
So on a technical sense, it is 100% feasible, but in a like working sense, if we're able to change the minds of developers, we don't know about that, and that's where it gets tricky.
Yeah, it's just all about your priorities and what they are.
Okay.
Because anything is doable, like...
that's true. That's
and
true.
It's just all about, like, money. Whether or not you want to save the most money or earn the most money or whatever. Yeah, so that's kind of the way it goes. Yeah, so another design, I guess, implication that I drew from watching this documentary was... I don't know if you heard the saying, form follows function. So, yeah, this term was coined by a famous architect who is also known as, like, the father of skyscrapers. His name is Louis Sullivan. And when I was watching this documentary, they were saying how, like, because drones can move through freely throughout the space, you're able to kind of, like, look at the room in a different height that, like, a person cannot probably reach. And then are also, like, there's a lot of times where you have, like, these little vantage points that people can probably not see. And I wonder, although, like, it was actually a photographer that brought this point up. Photographer Ed Reeves, who is apparently famous for the drones. He thinks that, like, having a drone would change the way architects design their buildings in general, and not including, like, I guess, the roof line or whatever. So I was wondering, like, what your thoughts of, like, when architects kind of they prioritize aesthetics over the function in order to make things look good, or like to design with a certain like picture in mind or end result in mind. It's like, it's sort of the idea is like, what are your thoughts of like a building being, I guess, photogenic or like Instagrammable?
So I think like, if I could choose between living or even looking at a building that is very eye-catching versus a building that is not eye-catching, of course I would lean towards the one that is more pleasant to look at. But if the one that's more pleasant to look at will fall apart and it's not constructed well, it's not designed well, and the integrity of the building and structure in itself is very, very poorly done compared to the one that isn't as aesthetically pleasing. I think, I mean, I think it's a no-brainer that I would choose the one that might not look as well, but I will not feel scared to be in.
What if this is a space that you don't actually live in, like, every day? You only go, like, once a year. Would your feelings about it change?
I don't think so, because even if I have to be in or around the building in general, if there is any risk that the building or structure is just not right, even if it means the floors are a little bit slanted, the walls are a little bit slanted, like, the integrity is good, but there are just some things that don't meet standards. I don't think I would feel comfortable being in it just because it looks nice.
So, like, you wouldn't want a room that is, like, saying an odd shape that, like, maybe it's, like, a trapezoid shape versus a rectangular shape because it was, like, it just, the trapezoid doesn't really have a purpose and is more so done for aesthetic reasons, like...
Oh, okay, that's the question.
Yeah, so it's more so, it's like, what if, like, a designer wants to, like, make something really, like, wacky on the purpose of being wacky in order to make it look good, like, for photos? And not less so it's, like, it's gonna fall apart, but more so, like, the room is, like, atypical for the purpose of being atypical.
But all of the standards are met. And
so it's, like, the building will stay, it will stay up, and it's, like, structurally sound, but it's just, like, the design is a bit odd compared to what we normally encounter every day.
I think in that case, then I would be perfectly fine with the odd-looking building.
Yeah.
I don't think that would influence my choice at all. Yeah. I don't know. That I don't see it being an issue. Yeah. What about you?
Okay, yeah. So, like, I also, like, feel the same.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know about you, but, like, the term photogenic or Instagrammable these days have become sort of a negative connotation.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I feel like people get really annoyed when they see, like, on BlogTO, for example, they would list out, like, 100 Instagrammable spots in Toronto, or 100 like spots that are good for photos in Toronto. And I feel like a lot of people get annoyed because they're like, oh, you're just doing it for the photo.
Oh.
So, like, I feel like because of that, I don't know. Personally, I feel like something being photogenic or Instagrammable worthy has now a negative connotation.
I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that.
Okay, so it's good to know that not everyone thinks that way. Yeah, so because of that, I felt against that because I'm like, I don't see how something that is, like, good in photos is necessarily a bad thing. And the same goes for design. Like, I don't think you should, like, penalize or, like, criticize a design just because it looks good on photos. But I do believe that, like, designers and, like, of all types should be worried that, like, you shouldn't, like, prioritize the final aesthetic look if it doesn't, like, work in the beginning. So it's more so it's like it's okay to design spaces that are very beautiful and all that kind of stuff, but you shouldn't, like, sacrifice saying, like, oh, like, say someone asked to put, like, 100 chairs in a room because you want to be able to sit 100 people in this, like, theater. Right. But the thing is, for your design to work, you can only sit, like, 50. I feel like that's something that you shouldn't compromise.
So what shouldn't be compromised in that situation?
You shouldn't compromise function for form.
So you should try your best to fit the 100
Yeah,
chairs?
so it's like,
okay, got it.
I think it's, like, the difference between, like, being able to say, like, your client asks for, like, sort of like a theater style seating with, like, just your typical theater, like, with 100 seats. But the thing is, you were like, I want to design this cool thing that's not a typical shape, but it can only fit half the seats. I think having, like, a half less than what was required or asked is a major difference. So it's like, in that case, you should always, like, prioritize what is required of the program.
Right, okay.
But if it's, like, a 1 or 2 chairs short, then I think that's, like, a different discussion because like, it's only 1 or 2, but, like, when it's, like, 50% less of what is asked, then, like,
yeah, for sure,
that's a big deal. So I think it's just, like, it's okay to make spaces that look good but just like make sure what is asked works in the first place. Yeah, so that's just my 2 cents.
Honestly, I didn't think there would have been like another side to
really
that opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, so I agree completely with all of what you just said.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like a lot of times people, like, roll their eyes when they see people take photos of things in general, but I'm just like, you take photos for memory. And, like, I don't know about you, but my memory isn't that, like, super well, so, like, it helps to have photos of something to remember, like, oh, I did do this, or oh, I did eat this, or I did see this, and all that kind of stuff.
I think the only way, or, like, the only thing that would bug me about seeing those Instagrammable spaces that you're talking about is, for example, I guess this was a few years back, but Graffiti Alley in Toronto was very popular, and everyone would go there just to take the Graffiti Alley photos.
It's still popular.
It's not as popping
That's
now.
True, yeah, because I feel like a lot of people have been there, done that.
Yeah. But I remember, like, those few years ago, during that super craze, the only thing that I was annoyed about was that because it was so Instagrammable and popular,
Yeah.
it was constantly busy and constantly packed.
Yeah.
And that is the only downside I have to, that's the only issue I have with a situation like that, is when the fact that it is so aesthetic that people want to congregate in the area, and it stops the general public to be able to visit it or even just walk past the area.
Yeah, so just like overcapacity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's the situation for a lot of things. Overcapacity. Especially since it's like public space. You can't really maintain it or manage it.
Yeah.
It's like you can't just have a secure guard saying like, you can't enter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Moving on to some things that I had issues with.
Okay.
So the thing that was brought up was aerial highways. And unlike the multitude of ways like drones can be beneficial for architecture, I think the discussion of aerial highway is like something that I'm sort of a skeptic about. And like initially my skepticism was partly due to the fact that like I'm thinking in the most literal term of like when they say highway, I literally think of like maybe like a passageway
like
to
an
like
infrastructure.
Yeah, like sort of like a car highway, but instead of you're in cars, you're in like drones in the sky or whatever. So yeah, I was thinking literally like of like a highway where like you would carry people throughout.
Yeah.
And like this is having been talked about for years in the past, where you have like these levitating cars taking people. So like I was quite skeptical about that because I'm like, I don't think this is gonna happen for at least the next 100 years. So it's like I'm just like, I don't know what's the point of this.
Yeah.
So that's my initial skepticism.
Yeah. So
Did you have that as well?
Yes.
Okay.
When I mentioned earlier that there were some parts that I agreed with, other parts that I didn't.
Yeah.
This was the part that I was very much like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
So part of the documentary they mentioned or along the lines of before we know it, we'll be seeing people driving in drones and like drones being able to transport people from one place to another. And there was this one specific part I remember where the documentary said people will no longer have to only access buildings from the ground and garage. They can access from anywhere on the building. And my initial thought was, I feel like this is a clip out of the Jetsons.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I just feel like, yes, sure, that may be possible, but just because it's possible
doesn't mean you should.
It doesn't mean that it's even gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like, if we think back to when the Jetsons were made, and even just back 20, 30 years, people did think that by now we would have flying cars.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe there are people out there who have invented flying cars, but they just because something is possible doesn't mean that it's going to work out.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a very idealistic viewpoint. And not only may it not happen, I'm on the side of it shouldn't happen.
Yeah. Another thing when they were talking about like, oh, you can carry people in drones, I was just like, what's the difference between a drone and a helicopter?
Exactly.
I guess the only difference is like you might not be the pilot in the drone, but the thing is like it's like the same size the same size vehicle or whatever. I'm just like, oh, okay, like don't already have helicopter landing pads or a lot of like buildings. I was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Going off of that, like with aircrafts that we already have, like helicopters, private jets, we have like air control traffic.
Yeah.
That is in place. And that is already like, I mean, I don't know much about it, but I can just assume how difficult it is to schedule all of the flights to make sure, obviously, no one crashes.
Yeah.
But if we are going to add so many more vehicles and people
and buildings.
Yes.
And buildings.
Yeah. That, it just complicates things that in ways that don't need to be complicated.
Yeah. So, and like another reason why I was skeptical, because like, because I watch a lot of YouTubers who have drones, one of them is actually based in Canada, and like through watching his like vlogs, I learned that it's actually really difficult to actually fly drones in Canada. And that's another reason that add to my skepticism. It's like, in order to fly a drone, or actually no, in Canada, drones are considered aircrafts or
Makes
air
sense.
vehicles. So because of that, you need to obtain a license, and the whole procedure for a license, like you have to read this big ass like manual book. Pardon my language. Pardon my language, but yeah, you had to read a really like long manual book. I remember the YouTuber like filmed his whole process, and he was like complaining because it's like he wanted a tiny toy drone to be flown. But like if you're anything over, I think like 25 grams, it's considered a vehicle or a flying vehicle, so you need to get a license for it. So you have to read this whole manual, and then you have to take an exam, like a written exam, and then you have to do a flying test in order to get a license to fly a drone. And this is just like your everyday drone, not even like the massive ones that military might use. So it's like because of that whole lengthy process, it was just in my head, I was just like, this will never happen in Canada.
Yeah.
Or if it will happen, it will like be way past our time.
Yeah. Another thing is I think people tend to see these flying vehicles as a way to mitigate like traffic congestion and to make traveling so much easier, so much quicker. But it doesn't work that way.
It's just another place to congest.
Yeah, so if people start choosing these aircrafts to do their everyday travel and not use roads anymore, the congestion's gonna go up in the air and the roads are gonna be free, and then 10 years later people are gonna be like, oh, I found a new way to travel.
We go back down the ground.
It's just a constant cycle because the problem isn't being fixed.
Yeah, so another thing that like the topic of aerial highways kind of brought to mind was the idea of airspace. And like this is something that I first learned about, like airspace being actually like a planning issue or whatever back in like second or third year. I don't recall when, but like I had a class where our prof actually told us that there was actually a dispute regarding airspace when they were trying to figure out ways to bring in more lecture spaces for Ryerson. So like the building or the space that was in discussion was actually the Cineplex Theater at 10 Dundas Square.
Oh, okay.
Have you been before?
I have.
Yeah, so like if you've been to the theater before, you realize it's like theater is not actually located within like the plaza or the building that's in the front, but it's actually located at the very back of this like block. And the reason why it's located at the very back because it's actually located on top of a Ryerson parking lot.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you were to go to like the middle of Ryerson University campus at like Gold and Victoria, you would see a parking structure, and then on top of that is just like a blank facade that they trying to make interesting because that's actually where the theaters are located.
Okay.
So the reason how this theater became on top of a parking lot was because first off, Ryerson wanted more lecture halls, but they didn't have physical land to kind of create that space, and also they didn't have the money to, I guess, build more theaters or lecture halls.
Okay.
And on the other hand, the retailers at 10 Dundas, or the people that own that facility, they wanted to bring in Cineplex Theater, but they didn't have like the space to build out like a 25 like auditorium theater, because that is actually a massive theater. It's like 2 floors. You can have like 25 movies going on at once. So you have one side that wants like lecture halls, but they have the space for it, but they don't have the money and all that kind of stuff. And then on the other hand, you have people with money that wants to build this thing, but they don't have the space for it. So in this sort of like, I don't know if it was a handshake agreement or whatever, but they came into the realization that they could help each other out. So then Ryerson was like, we will provide you with this airspace or the space above our parking lot for you to build this theater, in exchange that we can rent out your theaters for classrooms. And that's why a lot of Ryerson students actually have lectures in a Cineplex Theater, which is a very unusual situation.
Very unusual, yeah.
Yeah, so like a lot of times you would like go in at 9 a.m. You have to show your student ID to get into the theater to make sure you're not going to like try to steal a free movie. And like this only works out because a lot of times in the theaters on the weekdays there are no showings until at least like 3 p.m.
Right,
So from
okay.
like 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Ryerson has the theaters. And then from 3 p.m. onward there are movies. So it's really funny because like a lot of times Cineplex, they would open really early and they'd have to start preparing their like food and stuff like that. So around 11 a.m. you would start to smell like the smell of like fresh buttery popcorn.
But that is intended for the students.
No, that's not. It's just so they can start
ready.
They're getting ready for like the showings later because they have to make like a lot of popcorn just like for all the theaters.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because the students are there, a lot of students or profs end up buying some popcorn and like bringing it to class.
Wow. I can't imagine that. I would be so distracted, especially if I had just woken up and gone to my class and haven't had breakfast, haven't eaten anything, and then I suddenly start smelling delicious popcorn. How am I supposed to focus anymore?
Yeah, so another thing is like the seats in theaters, you know, are typically very cushiony, very comfy.
Oh, yeah.
So like sometimes when it's a very early 8 a.m. lecture, it can be really hard to stay awake.
How do people take notes then?
So they have, you know how each seat has a cup holder?
Yeah.
So they actually, I don't know if Cineplex made these trays or Ryerson made these trays, but they have these trays that are plastic.
Okay.
And there's like a little hole that like a little extrusion, so you can slip it into your cup holder and then it stays up.
So is this a thing where like every student before going into the theater / lecture hall, the prof is like, okay, everybody, come take your trays.
Yeah, so they would have a trolley off to the side where all the trays are, and you just pick it up and just walk up to the seats. And then you just put in your tray, and
I swear this is something that only Ryerson students can picture. Like,
Yeah.
I can't imagine how that works out.
And to get into the theater, it's like Cineplex workers wearing their like blue uniform, like checking your IDs to make sure you're actually a Ryerson student.
Imagine going to work, telling your friends, oh man, I have to pick up my shift at Cineplex today, and everyone being so confused because it's 9 a.m. and you have to explain to them that you're going to work at the movie theater to let students into the theater.
Class, yeah.
It doesn't sound real.
Yeah, it's really funny because sometimes, actually, one time, I had a lecture, I forget in which, I think auditorium, like let's say 21. And that same night, my friends and I went to go watch a movie in that same theater. So, yeah.
Wow.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
And, like, the whole idea of also airspace is really weird because it's like, how do you determine who owns what airspace? Like, in this case, it was the parking lot, the person who owned the parking lot, the building underneath, and the land underneath that owned the airspace above. But, like, that can't always be the case.
Yeah.
Especially if, like, you say it's a street, and then it's public space. So it's like, does the city own the airspace above the street? And does that mean they manage the airspace?
Yeah.
So I think, like, that's another weird skeptical thing. There are, like, thing that it's like there's no policies for it yet, and because of that I'm very like unsure and uneasy about the idea of actually introducing aerial highways.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that? How do you think we should manage it as someone who's more into the policies than me?
Manage the airspace?
Yeah.
I don't think I'm the right person to ask, even though this is our podcast. Because I just don't think it makes sense. Like, I think I'm on the side where we should just abandon this idea altogether. Like,
Yeah.
Maybe it's just because I'm the type of person who needs to see something to believe it, but it's not making sense to me.
Yeah.
I'm just seeing more problems and more issues than solutions with this, and with anything that provides more negatives than positives. I just why are you even thinking about this idea?
Yeah. So yeah, another thing along with the aerial highways is they talked about drone ports. I don't know if you recall that. So it's like, I guess like a rift off of aeroports, but instead of airport, it's a drone.
Yeah.
And like they were saying how like you can locate these drone ports at like the top of buildings, the roof of buildings, and I'm just like, another thing, how do you manage that? What are the policies for it? It's like, will it be like parking bylaws where like each building is required to have a certain amount of drone ports? And like, if that's the case, I don't necessarily think it should be, because I don't think every building needs a drone port. And especially like depending what the purpose of the drone is for, whether it's like to transport goods or people, like you're the type of like space you need for it, and all that kind of stuff kind of really like differentiates.
Yeah. And I think I mean, the idea of drone ports kind of already exists, and I think they're called helicopter pads.
Yeah.
So,
but I guess like in this sense, it's like you would introduce it to every building, and there would be like different sizes of them because like drones could be super tiny.
but
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I just think,
yeah, I think there's more questions than answers.
for sure.
Another part of like these drone ports, it's like it's gonna affect your rooftop, how your rooftop looks. So it's like that will affect the aesthetics of it, and like whether or not you can actually use the space for people. Like, if you have a drone port, like, can you have a rooftop bar next door? Like, how does that work? So more questions and answers. So I don't know about this.
Yeah, but overall, what did you think of the documentary?
Overall, I think the documentary does a good job of highlighting the pros and the cons that drones could actually have on cityscape. And the only thing I do wish is that they did talk more about, I guess, the design implications. Because, like, they really only talked about it, like, what the good things it can do for architecture in, like, a very short time.
Oh, yeah.
And then they talked mostly about, like, these drone ports, aerial highways. I feel like a lot of the segment was about that. Yeah. And those are the things that I was also uneasy about. And I think they did a good job of also bringing in criticisms that people had regarding these aerial highways, regarding especially like privacy. Yeah. And like that whole thing about privacy kind of just reminded me of like big tech and like data concerns and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, I'm glad they brought that up. But yeah, I wish they actually talked more about the architecture.
Yeah, I think I agree completely. It was filmed very well. It was edited very well. There was nice music along with it. Yeah. But in terms of actual content, I really, really appreciated understanding how drones can help and how they are currently maybe helping the industry move along. But I agree, like, too much of the documentary in itself was about, like, it was too idealistic. More than half of it, I think, was about, let's try to do this because we can get this out of it. But I think there isn't enough research, there isn't enough analysis behind the feasibility behind it all, that so much of the documentary was just, it was too fictional. It felt like I was watching a
just like what people hope would happen.
Exactly. And that part was not enjoyable for me, and it made me think, am I even watching a documentary still, or is this like something else entirely?
Yeah, so like after all, this documentary was only 17 minutes, so maybe one thing they could do is do an expanded version with a lot more details and actually like facts that like we can actually go follow up on. Yeah. So with that being said, reviewing Elevation, the documentary, was the plan for now. Listen to our next episode to continue figuring it out with us. Thanks for following along to this episode. If you liked it, please give us a like. Subscribe for more, and until then, follow us on Instagram at What's the Plan Podcast for what the next plan is.